feel like sharing this. Sometimes I never really know how, but I think that one thing that I have never really integrated is, or at least made connection to, is the experience I had of, and some of you will know about this, but I've never really publicly put it out there before, was the experience I had of experiencing this kind of psychological singularity, where I essentially experienced hell. It's what hell is. It seemed like a collection of things, but it was different. It was almost like different densities to it, and it was essentially reliving. At least one aspect was reliving every single variation that this possible life could experience, but all the worst versions of it. So it's essentially, hell is a relative thing, right? It doesn't really exist, but it exists relatively in the same way that anything else can exist relatively if we make it exist, right? In the same way that heaven can exist. These are ideas, but these are ideas that can be lived. And you've got to think, well, it's always relative to, my heaven might not be your heaven, your hell might not be my hell. It's always relative to the experienced mind that seems to go through it, right? Because ultimately there wasn't really a separate entity that's going into hell, but that's the experience. Whether we're one unified infinite field of consciousness or not, the experience was that. The experience was I was an individual living infinite lifetimes, not infinite versions of this lifetime, but they were all the worst possible scenarios. And there was apocalyptic events, there was tons of just, you can't really put it into words, but you witness yourself dying, lifetime after lifetime. And it was like this I had this knowing that I was aware that this was like hell. Like I was aware there was somehow I knew. And you'll see this sometimes. Sometimes there's cases of people who we catch in the midst of these experiences where they're aware that they're living through it's almost like they're living through a complete deja vu. I don't know whether that's the same experience that I was going through in this hell experience, but it was, it's a related thing, and I don't know how it happens, but anyway, you then spend, eternity in total hopelessness, total dread, fear, and hopelessness. And it's as if there is no perception other than the blackness of a void, and there's no body there. None of this was with a body. It was just a black, infinite void. I think black is just the way the mind interprets the experience. I don't know, zero-dimensional emptiness. But there was some physicality to it by nature of there being an emptiness, right? Because it wasn't nothing, it was something. And it would never end, essentially. There was no ending to it. You've got to think, 1 second of this human time of infinity or eternity is the same length as 1 year of this time in infinite eternity, right? Infinite hopelessness. When it's when you don't want it to end, when you experience infinity where it's pleasant, time flies, right? But this was the opposite of that. So a second in that place is the same as a million years in that place of this earthly time linear frame. So anyway, I spent that eternity in there, and somehow I got out. Somehow it just somehow ended. I don't know how you can have an experience of eternity and then it ends, but clearly you can, and we actually experience that quite often. We never really noticed that, but this was the version of it that was. It was the furthest you can possibly turn away from the light of God. It's the absolute furthest. You can't turn further away than that. It's complete and utter darkness. And then I somehow managed to recognize I was alive. I think that was the thing that brought me out. I was still alive. This aliveness was very prominent in the end, and I came back, and then all of a sudden I experienced all the suffering that has ever occurred. Everything, every single form of suffering that has ever happened or could exist. It was I just went into the storage cabinet for the entire suffering of everything that's ever happened, and tripped over and fell into it. Essentially, it was just the experience of everything, but the experience of all suffering. And that was hard. That was really hard. And then after that, I experienced as if I was the perpetrator of it. So it was like experiencing the suffering, then experiencing as if I had caused the suffering to existence. I had caused existence's suffering. And it was like infinite blame, shame, and guilt. It was as if God, it was as if the power of the classic God had just condemned me to infinity. Like it was like there was no turning. There was like I was the most evil thing you could possibly imagine. I thought that's what I was, and I had experienced as if I had actually committed those insidious acts. All of them, So at this stage, I am condemning myself, because ultimately there was a presence of some type of being that was condemning me, but I couldn't tell what it was. And then I started to condemn myself for that, and that was the real suffering. It wasn't the suffering for me. If I was to summarize the worst part of it, it wasn't the various lifetimes. It wasn't the infinite, eternal absence of love and light in limbo. It wasn't the entire suffering of everything that's happened, of everything in existence. It was the blame and shame and guilt that I imposed on myself for thinking I had done those things. That was the worst part of it, of the entire thing. And what I've shared with you now is about 30% of everything that happened in that event. I would not comprehend. I could not physically comprehend anything else other than those things. I don't know if I would be able to function in reality if I remembered more than that 30%. But I think that 30% was, a fair amount to remember. But in that moment, there was nothing left to turn to. There was nothing. I had seen every reality that I could live. I had experienced what suffering was to a very clear degree. I had just experienced the loneliness, the most loneliest existence that could ever be experienced. And then I was left as if I had just caused it all. So you can't really fathom, and I wouldn't like to, anything more than that. So long story short, the purpose of sharing this is that the one thing that healed the entire experience was recognizing that the power I have to forgive is the power of God. It's the ultimate power of existence. It's the ultimate reality. And we can't really claim that there is a being that forgives. I wasn't an individual being that was just imposing forgiveness on myself. Forgiveness is the word we use to describe the ultimate forgiving. Forgiving the acceptance prior to anything having happened to happen. It's the ultimate acceptance. It's the ultimate reality, purely because it's what allows everything to take place. It's for, as in prior to, giving. It's for giving everything. It's the ultimate justice. It's the ultimate love. It's the premise of existence to allow everything to happen. Everything, if there wants to be an experience, everything has to happen. That was the experience of that side of things, and it showed me that that is the power forgiveness has. And we need to see forgiveness not as some type of way of only using it when someone has wronged us. Because what use is that, right? We have to experience the wrongdoings of others in order to experience heaven, or in order to experience the ultimate reality. No. Forgiveness is now. That's when forgiveness takes place. It takes place in this moment. And it takes place by recognizing that which has the power to forgive. And what would have the power to forgive such an event like that? Hello. Oh wow, these are white doggies. Wow. I've made a few friends today in this spot.
It's a good place to sit.
It's a lovely place, right?
Oh,
he's got my shoe.
It's a good place to sit.
It's a lovely place. Oh wow, these are very friendly.